Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in a second. Hope you're doing well. As people are coming in, a couple of quick Zoom reminders, though I feel like at this point, 11 weeks in, that people who even were on the deficient side of technology have now become not only efficient and proficient, but potentially experts. But a review, always a good thing. Reminder that in this platform of Zoom, you have a few options by which you can communicate with me. There's the chat function down there. There's the Q&A function over there. And then there is the potential for you to raise your hand virtually. So at the point when we are going to be gathering your insights, which are phenomenal always, and I look forward to those. When we get to that point in our session, that will be the time for you to raise your hand. But beforehand, you can start if you have an idea that you want to get out there before it crosses your, escapes your mind. Feel free to put that down in the Q&A section or in the chat function. So it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for coming back for another session of Talmud Tales, week 11. The focus today is on the topic of free will. So before we even get into that, let's do our blessing. Feel free to join me out loud or in your hearts with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Engaging in the study of Torah. I want to share one thing with you, a little promo before we get into our session today. Tonight, of course, starts Shavuot around the globe. At Wilshire Boulevard Temple, we have an incredible array of learning opportunities this evening. Traditionally, people stay up all night and study, but we're not doing that. We're going until 10:30, which is plenty. So starting at 7 p.m. tonight, we have a celebration service to mark the beginning of Shavuot with Cantor Gurney. Then we have a session with Rabbi Susan Nanis, all about how Jews in other times have coped with disaster and exploration on how they've gotten through it and basically how we can get through that as well. Then Rabbi Eshel will talk about personal 10 commandments and how have we changed during this pandemic. Then Cantor Lisa Peacock is bringing in an extraordinary group of musicians who are going to be doing a live performance of some of their world music. So definitely worth checking that out as well. Rabbi Bo Shapiro is going to talk about 5 things that many Jews don't really appreciate about Judaism that they should. So giving some insights and uncovering some of those things, and especially given what he has done through his conversion program that he created a few years ago. Rabbi Leader is going to talk about COVID-19 and its connection to the story of creation. And then I'm going to wrap it up if anyone is left at that point besides me. And we're going to be talking about, since it is a late night conversation, some of those R-rated stories in the Torah, the ones that you did not learn in religious school, and what we can learn from those stories. So an exploration of those, you can join for a little l'chaim if you want, or you can just join by with a milkshake. Regardless, if you want to have that, I'm going to just, let's see if I can give you, I just chatted everyone the link if you want to register so that you can be a part of the Zoom. And that way you can tune in, and basically it's one Zoom for the whole evening. So you can basically keep your Zoom on the whole night and just enjoy all kinds of learning. Okay, let's get to our topic. Our topic today, free will, something that I have been thinking about, really something that got me into the rabbinate, probably something that really was sparked when I went to college. I've always been fascinated with human nature and studied neuroscience in college with the hopes of trying to unlock elements of the human condition through science. And what I found is that as I was exploring this idea of human nature and good and evil in college, I began taking some classes in Judaic studies and found that there was such a depth of questioning about human nature that came out of our own tradition, and I was hooked. So I've always been really interested in this idea of free will. What kind of determination do we have over our own fate and our own future, and what is predetermined? And so that is the story, the crux of the story that we are going to be looking at today. It's a story about Rabbi Akiva and his daughter. Now, a little bit of pre-work on this, on Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, of course, a very famous rabbi. In Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, he was known to say, all is foreseen and free will is given. Okay, so somewhat of a contradictory statement. All is foreseen and free will is given. So how can those two things coexist? And I think this story plays with this idea of what does it mean that our fate is determined and at the same time we have free will over our destiny and over how our future is going to look. So let's get into the story. As is our tradition here, I'll read through it once and then we'll go back and break it down, and then we'll open it up for your insights and your comments and your questions. Again, think about the characters who are in the story. There are only 3 of them in this one. What journey are they going on, emotionally or spiritually? And of course, what is the relevance to our own lives today? Okay, so let's get to it. Here we go. Free will from Shabbat 156b. Rabbi Akiva had a daughter. Astrologers told him on the same day that she enters under the wedding canopy, a snake will bite her and she will die. He was very worried about this prediction. On the day of her wedding, she happened to be holding the ornamental pin from her hair and stuck it into a hole in the wall. By chance, the pin penetrated the eye of the snake coiled behind the wall and remained stuck there. In the morning, when she took out the pin, the dead snake was pulled and came out with it. Her father, Rabbi Akiva, said to her, "What did you do?" She told him, "Last night, a poor person came and knocked on the door. Everyone was preoccupied with the feast and nobody heard him. I took the gift you had given me and gave it to him." Rabbi Akiva said to her, "You performed a mitzvah and you were saved by its merit." Rabbi Akiva went out and taught, and charity will save from death, not merely from an unusual, unnatural death, but even from death itself. Okay, not a long story, but there's lots to it. Another reason, by the way, that I brought this story is last week we talked about the angel of death. I got some great emails from people afterwards sharing more of their insights about that story. So yet again, here we have a story about death, and we have a story about an attempt to understand what's our role in our own deaths. Do we have any control? There's no angel of death in this story, but there is death. Okay, so now let's go back and break it down and see what we can come up with. And of course, then spend some time with you guys sharing your thoughts. Okay, Rabbi Akiva, famous rabbi, as I said. This is really in 3 parts. We have 3 parts to this story. We have the prequel where Rabbi Akiva hears about the fate of his daughter. Then we have the actual event itself, and then we have the reflection afterwards. So 3 different parts. And I want you to notice that Rabbi Akiva's perspective seems to shift as we move through the story. So if you want to, sorry, I'm distracted because I think some people haven't necessarily don't have it. If you have the story, and you, maybe Dawn or Jessica, if you can share the link to the story online, that would be great, so that people who didn't have it before can have it. Okay, again, we're going to start again. I won't be distracted anymore. Still working on multitasking. Here we go. 3 parts. It begins with Rabbi Akiva hearing about his daughter. Okay, now the astrologers told him. Now you have to imagine these astrologers were not Jews necessarily, but imagine they were like the financial advisors of the time, financial analysts even. They were the ones who, in a way, were able to look at the stars and make predictions about the future, and they were taken pretty seriously. For example, think about the phrase Mazel Tov, right? Mazal is star or fate, right? So Mazal Tov is may you have a good fate. It really is linked to this idea of astrology, this idea of of the stars in the sky linked to this idea of astrology. So we still hold on to the power of the astrologer every time we say Mazel Tov to someone. It's not that they were to just be seen as false prophets. People took them seriously. So here they were, and they make this prediction that Rabbi Akiva's daughter, her future is not so bright. On the day that she's supposed to get married, a snake's going to bite her and she's going to die. Okay. So in other words, fate, determinism, everything is laid out and clear. Now, Rabbi Akiva could do a variety of things here. This is what he does. He's very worried about this prediction, but that's all we know about what happens between the time he hears this, which we assume is a long time before his daughter gets married, and the day of her wedding. He could have completely prevented the wedding. He could have ignored the astrologers altogether and just ignored and not been worried at all because dismissing them. Or he could have worried and done nothing about it, which is the case here, right? So when he has been told that this is the fate of his daughter, it's an interesting reaction. It's kind of this struggle that seems to be happening within him, where imagine if someone were to give you some kind of prediction about your future. I guess the best one would be something about your health, where we're not really sure what this medical result says from this examination or from this test, but it may not be good, right? And you are then you're stuck with a few options. One, you dismiss it and you don't worry about it, or two, you worry about it and start thinking about all the things that could happen. Now here, it seems as though he's taking the pathway of he's worried about this, but he's not going to try and intervene. An interesting choice. Why does he make that choice? So I want you to be thinking about why does Rabbi Akiva make the choice not to intervene with his daughter? He doesn't say to her, he doesn't warn her about this prediction from the astrologers. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And so all we know is that he's been sitting with this angst, right? All of us have those moments of those times where we felt like we can look into the future, or someone has kind of predicted something about the future for ourselves or for our society, and we sit with it with fear and anxiety and discomfort and worry. That seems to be the kind of psychological place that Rabbi Akiva is in. And then to imagine that now this fateful day is coming for his daughter's wedding. And on the day of the wedding, she happened to be holding a pin that was in her hair, and she stuck it into a hole in the wall. And by chance, it penetrated the eye of the snake and remained stuck there, right? So somehow there was a snake coiled behind the wall, and she put this pin in the wall. I don't know if that was something she did all the time, who knows? And it stuck into the snake. Now, of course, the snake, if we think about what the snake represents, the snake is not just a literal snake here, right? We can imagine that the snake represents Satan, the evil inclination. Think about the snake in the Garden of Eden. There are all these references that we've seen in so many of our stories about the Garden of Eden and the role of this satanic figure, or the evil inclination, or the angel of death. This is something as though the snake represents something greater that she is somehow unwittingly overcoming. And so she sticks it in, and then her father, imagine he's sitting there racking his hands thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to my daughter? And then miraculously, she is alive. And so he asks her, what did you do? In other words, did you do something unusual? Did you change something? It's as if he wants to understand how this happened, right? What happened that allowed her to survive what was supposed to be her fate? And she said, well, last night, a poor person came and knocked on the door, and everyone was preoccupied with the feast, and nobody heard him. And I took the gift you had given me, and I gave it to him. And so that's all she did. And then he said, well, you performed a mitzvah and you were saved by its merit. So something that she does has somehow changed the course of fate, according to the story. The story seems to be trying to teach us something about our actions and the impact of our actions, that even though fate is foreseen and declared, that there is an element of control that we have here. And what is it that she does? She gave her gifts to others. So symbolically, I think there's a really important teaching in here about what Rabbi Akiva's daughter is doing. She didn't do anything out of the ordinary from her perspective. From her perspective, she had no warning that anything was even going awry. I mean, imagine she's getting ready for the best day of her life. And so she's just doing what she does. And what she does is someone who, in the midst of where everyone else is busy and preoccupied with the feast, and no one is really paying attention to anything else, she somehow was able to hear the knock on the door. Imagine going back to some of the earlier conversations we've had about hearing those who are suffering, those who are vulnerable. She somehow has an ear to this person who is neglected, who is suffering, who is in need of care. And she goes to him, and not only does she go to him, she gives her gift to him. And somehow by her doing this, by her figuring out, how can I give what has been given to me to someone else, passing that along, passing my gifts along to another person, that I think there's a really important teaching there that will come back later on in the story, that she took action, and that as a result, Rabbi Akiva says, you performed a mitzvah and you were saved. In other words, his understanding is that because of this action and how she treated this person, her life was changed. And that his perspective is changed to the point where he then goes out and teaches, and charity will save from death. Not merely from an unusual, unnatural death, but even from death itself. Now, it's important to realize that the word charity, it's not necessarily the best translation here from Proverbs 10:2, because there is no real word for charity in Judaism and in Hebrew. It's tzedakah, and tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. So in other words, and righteousness will save you from death, right? I should just change this right now. Righteousness will save you from death. That is this idea of tzedakah. Is something that can save you from death. Now, this, one of the most prominent ways in which we understand this is utshuva, tzedakah, tefillah. The three things that we are told during the Unatana Tokef prayer on high holidays, that those are the three things: doing tshuva, repentance or returning to ourselves, tzedakah, and then tefillah, prayer. These are the three things that can not necessarily, there's usually a bad translation which indicates that if you do those three things, your future is changed and it will avert God's decree. But really, the explanation, the translation is it will lessen the severity of the decree. In other words, you can't necessarily change your future, but those three things will impact your future. Slightly different than this, which seems to indicate that yes, tzedakah will save you from death, and not just merely from some unnatural death. In other words, for you to be bitten by a snake and die, but from death itself, right? Really, a really powerful message that really this is not about physical death at all. I think this is not about the fact that you go out and you just do something randomly and that can change your life. No, that your actions, especially when you are intentional with your actions, when you are deep within the core of what you think is the right way to walk through the world, because Rabbi Akiva's daughter recognized that there is a certain way that she wanted to walk through the world. She had her ear attuned to something. Her ear was attuned to that knock on the door when no one else even heard it. In the midst of all the noise, in the midst of people really focusing mostly on themselves and on their own joy, even in the midst of that, while they were focused on that, she had the ability to both be in that present moment and experience the joy of her life, but also be attuned to the suffering of those who are knocking at the door, right? Symbolically, there are so many people who are knocking on the door right now. And so she responded to that and gave of her gift, right? She gave a gift. And the gift was, in this story, a literal gift. But of course, we should be reading this as a symbolic, figurative gift. What it means to walk through the world and to be able to give your gifts to other people is something, and to pass that along is something that really allows you to live almost forever, or at least a lot longer than your physical life. because that's what we learned from Rabbi Akiva's statement at the end, that giving, this righteousness, this tzedakah, has the capacity potentially to make you live a longer life. Who knows? There is the idea that what our actions have the potential to change our fate, that free will is baked into the Jewish concept. I mean, all we have to do is go back to the story of Adam and Eve, speaking of snakes, the story of Adam and Eve, which is the basis for this idea of free will. Unlike the way the Christians took that story as the fall from grace, the story of Adam and Eve was the opportunity where the human essence of free will was established, where we have choice, and the choices we make can determine all kinds of things. So here, you don't die if you give your gifts to the world. If you figure out a way to give more than you receive, if you figure out a way where you can create a legacy of giving, that can be, tzedakah can take lots of forms, right? So one, of course, is you can have your name on a building. That is a form, that is a significant form of tzedakah, in a way in which your name and your memory stay alive. But there are many other ways we can give tzedakah. And that this is a story about what is the legacy that you are going to leave behind you? And how can you establish that legacy? How can you be thinking about that? I think one of the most important lessons that we can take is that how we behave can change our fate, right? It's a very simple line, but I think this is a really important Jewish teaching that is reinforced by the story, that our actions determine how we live, and more importantly, how we are remembered. And that death really comes when no one remembers you anymore, right? When we say the mourner's Kaddish, and anytime I do a funeral, when I talk to people about the importance of this phrase, may her memory be a blessing, right? And the fact that on Saturday morning, Jews across the world are going to have a Yizkor service, which happens 4 times a year, a memorial service, that when we keep someone's memory alive, we are keeping them alive in essence. But as soon as those memories disappear, as soon as we're no longer telling the stories, as soon as we forget their name, that's real death. And that we have the capacity to create a legacy and to live beyond our physical life. And we have, if not the opportunity, an obligation to do so. And so this story seems to be indicating that when you give of yourself, when you give your gifts, when you recognize and are attuned to the other, and when you can figure out a way to give that to others, there's a way to avert death. There's, I think, a shift here in the way in which Rabbi Akiva understands how the world works. And I think that is something that many of us experience throughout our lives, depending on what happens in our lives, right? Think about those moments of tragedy, of pain, of joy, of celebration in your life. And if you were to create your theology now and create an understanding of what matters, what's purpose, and how the world works, it is completely shaped by your own experiences and what you've done. And the longer you've lived, of course, the more you've experienced, the more you can start to shift your theology. Your theology is not the same it was years ago. And so Rabbi Akiva, even the famous Rabbi Akiva, goes through a transition of understanding his place and our purpose in the world, starting from this idea that maybe he was supportive of this idea that fate, it's all just laid out for us. We don't really have much that we can do. And slowly he comes around to this idea that we actually have more power over our future than we may even think. See if there's anything else that I wanted to catch on here. No, let's go from there. And then I'm sure there's more. There's always more. Okay, so at this point, let's open it up for thoughts on free will, thoughts on Rabbi Akiva or his daughter. There's so much in all of these stories that I'm sure there were things that I wanted to say that I didn't even get to. So, okay, let's see. So if you have questions, if you have comments, raise your virtual hand and then I'll be able to unmute you and we can share that. We have a few things here. We'll start off with Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Rabbi.
Hello.
I think the important points that we can touch on and learn from is related to this concept of immortality, in the sense only that free will and our choices dictate those people who we interact with and those people who will share the memories of us after we are gone. And the more tzedakah, the more charity, the more loving kindness acts that you choose to do with more and more people allows your memory to grow. And also, if we believe that it represents the value in the hereafter that we are going to attain, the more you give away, the more you will ultimately receive, not just in memory here, but in worth later.
Yes, great point. And I would say to some degree, we have control over with whom we interact. And I would say that this story even seems to suggest there are times and there are people who are going to come across our path that we aren't expecting. They are the stranger. And how we treat that stranger and how we determine our relationship with those people and the kind of legacy we want to leave is going to be impacted by how we interact with everyone, right? Every single person has the opportunity to help us live a little longer. And that doesn't necessarily mean physically longer, but it means we have the ability to impact more and more people. And if we have that mentality, if we have that drive, that the fire that is within us is one of giving of our gifts to others, then we have the capacity to create a legacy that even those who don't really know us can benefit from. So thank you very much, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Abby. Hi.
Okay, hi. So is it really a legacy for others, or is it really about ourselves? Because if, you can do many charitable things, you don't need your name on a building. If I had that much money, I'd do it anonymously. So for me, it's about giving. And recently I had to testify at this court appearance and for a student, and they said, well, who's paying you? And I said, well, I'm just doing it for the student. And I said, sometimes you get paid other than money, but I'm not doing it for other people. I'm doing it for myself. I don't, you know what I'm saying? People later on will never know that. Do you know what I'm saying? Or anything that I've done. So I think I don't know if it's for a legacy. It's really about how you feel about your own self. I don't.
You're absolutely right, Abby. That's a really good point. Tzedakah, we tend to focus on tzedakah as an opportunity for us to do something for someone else, that our giving is benefiting another person. But I think the hidden truth of tzedakah is what it does for us individually, right? So that I would even argue that legacy is really something that we are creating for ourselves. It is established by other people to a degree, but the only way a meaningful legacy is really established is if we, in our minds, want to go through life being the best person we can so that we can leave behind values and ideas and relationships that are based on a good value system. So at the end of the day, tzedakah, I think, benefits the giver even more so potentially than the receiver. And as you mentioned, Maimonides has a whole idea of levels of tzedakah, and the highest level is anonymity. And when the receiver and the giver don't know who is giving and receiving. But you're right, selfish is the wrong word, but there is something that we gain that's really important about tzedakah. Here in this story, the daughter doesn't know what she's gaining. She's not really out to gain. She doesn't know that her fate is on the line. She's just doing what she does. She, I think, is supposed to serve as the model of where we should be getting. We should all be trying to be like Rabbi Akiva's daughter, where our actions are such that we just naturally do what is right. We are naturally attuned to things that other people may be drowned out to. The noises and the sounds of our own lives sometimes drown out the knocking of that door. But if we could constantly try and be in a place like Rabbi Akiva's daughter, then that is a wonderful place to be. So thank you, Abby. Really appreciate that. Susan. Hi, Susan. Yes. Go ahead, Susan. I'm trying to unmute you.
Yeah, I just unmuted.
Okay, great.
Was the gift. And initially I thought, they're party gifts at a wedding, but I thought, what's the gift that Akiva had given her. It seems to me the gift is the gift of tzedakah, of her walking in his ways, his righteousness. And that's what I thought she passed on, because that's the one that, party gifts struck me right away, but that's not what I think is happening here. And then
Great.
the other thing, while I was also thinking of gifts and then living on, for those who remain, when someone you love dies, those who remain, I know that hit me the most. What can we do to perpetuate his goodness, his memory? And it would have been what it ended up was a gift of what he was doing good in the world and perpetuating that. So I think that's even something more. I mean, in the actual death, how that person can live on through their legatees, their family and friends who honor them in a certain way. So that's
Thank you.
too. I mean, that goes on. Akiva giving his daughter the righteousness, and then when someone dies, their loved ones perpetuating that person's goodness.
Wonderful. Right. L'dor vador, from generation to generation, the importance that we have certain gifts and qualities, and we have an obligation to pass those down, right? And that symbolically, as Susan is pointing out, maybe the gift that she received from Rabbi Akiva is not a physical gift that she gave to this poor man, but she gave this gift of righteousness, of tzedakah, this mentality, a certain way of understanding the world. And that, how are we passing that down to people, and how is our own gifts going to be passed down and received and disseminated after our death as well. So thank you very much. Merle, let me see if hi Merle.
I was thinking about what you said about, and I think Abby might have said something too about, you give the natural part of giving. I was always taught that the natural part of giving is that you don't require your name on something, that you, l'dor vador, you pass that philosophy down to your children, grandchildren, friends, whatever. That part about having to have your name on a building, that you feel you have to have your name on the building, not because whoever you gave to feels they want to honor you. The having to have your name on the building disturbs me, because then are you really giving naturally, or are you giving because you're going to get your name on a building? How do you want to pass down that natural part of tzedakah?
Yeah, and I think for every individual, it's a good point, and every family and every individual is different. In some ways, that is a way to make sure that someone's descendants and that their legacy is, even maybe it's a way for people to teach the next generation in their family that this is a clear sign that our family is dedicated to certain causes and to giving. And on others, it's not that this hierarchy of giving according to Maimonides suggests that if you're not at the highest level, that tzedakah doesn't matter and isn't important. There are all of these levels are important, and I think we have to be very careful with the sometimes we want to judge those who give tzedakah in a different way than we do. And I think as was pointed out earlier, that sometimes the motivation and what we're really getting is maybe it's sometimes to give to the other, but sometimes there is a real sense that the person who is giving needs that to be declared for themselves. Maybe that is an important part of what they are trying to teach themselves, their family. You'd have to ask someone who has done that. I'm not someone who has my name anywhere and publicly like that, but I think there are a lot of different ways in which our community has accepted tzedakah, because at the end of the day, the fact that people are giving is what's really important, right? The lesson here is that if you have gifts that you have to give, you need to share them, and you may have a way in which you want to be seen for that gift, and that could be fine. So I think we have to be very careful with that, because there are a lot of different pieces that go into people's decisions on how they give and when they give, and how much declaration they want associated with that. I know Esther is on this chain. I don't know if she wants to maybe take this, since she was a person who's worked in development in the Jewish world in the past. But and so she'll know more about it than I do. So I'm gonna have her answer in a second. But I do think you're raising a really important point, and I'm gonna turn it over to Esther, if you don't mind. Where did she go? Esther, do you mind maybe sharing your 2 cents, given your background?
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. I also was thinking very similarly to what you were saying about how for some people that I have worked with in the past, doing major gifts, doing capital gifts, it is a very important piece of giving for them. And for many, very much on the spiritual level, it's really important for them, for the generations to follow. But again, so I have been witness to that being, a really selfless piece, even though outwardly it may not look like that. Part of the gift for people, and really important. And for some people that I've worked with in the past, they didn't have any relatives that were living, or they didn't have any other family members. And it was, for some people, the only way they could really see their name being continued. And so I agree with you. We all have to sort of suspend our judgment, because whatever level of giving it is, it's still giving, and it's still important. And I think it's still really important. So that's, I don't know if it's 2 cents, maybe 1 cent, my opinion on that. And thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks, Esther. Thank you. I see Jeff has his hand up again. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think that you have to look at this in 2 ways. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of 2 comments is that you have to realize what a person is supposed to do at a Shiva sitting, and what the person who comes to help mourn with the woman or man who has sustained that loss is to share the acts of loving kindness that they had with the deceased. They're to tell the stories that aggrandize and make that person a valuable experience in their life. And the other comment is that you have to work backwards. When you talk about teshuvah, tzedakah, and loving kindness, tzedakah and loving kindness come and are derivative out of the acts of loving kindness. The greatest effort and the greatest reward personally stems from your free will choices of these acts of loving kindness, whether it's in the realm of self for teshuvah, or whether it's to others as tzedakah. It's acts of kindness that have that great value. All the rest is commentary.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, look, I think we've. Oh, Susan, you have your hand up. Yes.
Just one thing about the Merle's concern about having one's name on the giving. And I hear being opposed to that. And I hear that a lot of criticism about, oh, they have to have their name. On the other hand, I read, because we were interested in some of the ins and outs of giving, that you can often encourage other people to give as well if they know that you've given to this cause. You set a model for your children and for others. And in Maimonides' 8 steps of giving, the top one, the highest priority, was helping someone earn a living. And yes, he had all of these, with the the recipient becomes anonymous. You don't want to embarrass them and so on. So I think there's also a level of pride and to the person who gives, that is a name on that, wherever it is, that you contributed to this cause or to this building or to this community. And, you know, there's something in that too. Yes, you can have it anonymous, but, you know, when you say it's written in stone, this is written in stone or whatever. So I wouldn't discredit, as Esther said, the various reasons, or you put the name of, or you put the name of the loved one there. And often gifts are given in memory of or so. Why not?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Susan. And thank you for reiterating that the highest level of Maimonides' 8 levels is to allow someone to be able to support themselves, right? And to teach them. That teaching, almost that teaching is on the highest level of tzedakah, is teaching others to be able to do it as well. And you're right. And, you know, there are all kinds of strategies that institutions use, and sometimes people don't even necessarily want their name, but the institution wants their name there. Also, as Susan mentioned, to help others be motivated to give, because for some people it's a lot easier to do that than others, right? Rabbi Akiva's daughter was someone who just intuitively knew and was able to hear the need of the other. And some people are drowned out, understandably, with all the other things going on in their lives. And we have to sometimes help guide other people on the path back to the path that will ultimately benefit them and benefit other people. You know, it's interesting that we have focused so much on the giving part of this, and how really that what we're drawn to, what I'm hearing, what we're drawn to is this idea of legacy, this idea of tzedakah, of giving. And I also want to remind us that in this time of COVID-19, and especially now we're continuing more and more to be going out into the world. Some would say too fast, some would say too slow. You know, it depends on where you are in that. But this idea that we are now in a place where our fate is in our hands in many ways, right? Our actions, how we decide to move back out into the world. And I know I've said this almost every session, but it's something that I keep thinking about, because I'm being drawn more and more back into the world, especially now that churches and synagogues are opening up. And what does that mean for our community? And what does that mean for me personally? And what does that mean for my family? What does that mean for me as a clergy person for a community, serving others? There are a lot of different layers, not just for me, but for all of us, when we think about what does it mean to go back out there, and how are we going to utilize our free will to make sure that as much as possible we are staying safe in however we want to define that. And some things are out of our control. According to the astrologers, you know, they said, you know, it's not in your control. And some people are taking the approach, well, you know, it's not going to happen to me. But I think there is a lesson in here also that we need to be very aware that there is a scary factor, that some things are out there waiting for us, like that snake behind the wall that you don't even know it exists, right? And COVID-19 really is like that snake behind the wall. It is something hidden. We can't see it. It is there. And whether or not we have the power to stop it is up in the air. And however, we do have the power to really figure out, what does safe mean to me? And how can we listen to our own needs and our own minds and our own fears? And how can we be paying attention to the community around us so that we can really feel as in charge and as in control as possible? Because when people don't feel in control, that's when things start to get dangerous and anxieties start to bubble up. So the more we can think about, how can we stay attuned to that knock on the door? How can we really focus on what kind of legacy do we want to leave for ourselves, for our children, for our great-grandchildren? And how do we want to exert our own path, even though there are things out of our control? How can we make sure that we recognize over and over again the intentionality of our actions and the impact that our actions can have on our future? So a little bit about Rabbi Akiva and his daughter. I hope you'll join us for some of the Shavuot learnings tonight. As I mentioned at the start of this, You can find more information on our website about that. Of course, we'll be back next week for another Talmud tale, and wishing you a Chag Sameach and an early Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, everyone.